Hello and welcome. Thanks for coming to our crappie fishing tips edition of Ask an Angler. So we're going to be covering all things crappie today and kind of go through what you're looking for at this time of year, kind of what the fish themselves are looking for and where you might find them in the water and whereabouts, as well as the baits and techniques that you're going to use to find yourself some success this spring. Crappie are a great panfish species, great for new anglers, especially when they're really right getting into the spawn, that kind of last week of the pre-spawn when they're pushed up shallow, um, getting ready to drop eggs and spawn. That's usually your best bite. That's when you catch some of the bigger fish in really shallow water, and it's just a fun time of year. And crappie are great to eat, so it's always a fun species to get after, to have a fish fry or pan sear up some fish, throw them on the grill. You catch a nice big pound and a half or 2 pound crappie, you get a nice big fillet off of the side of it. These asking anglers, they're meant to be conversational. So I have a rough script of everything that I'm going to kind of touch on and go through. But if I'm moving too fast, or if you want some more detail on what I'm talking about, or you just have a random question, put it in the chat bar at any time during the course, and we'll address them as we go. You go through 2 hours of this and we get to the end and you might have forgot something. So better to just ask the question when it's top of mind, and we'll cover it as we go along. And then when we get to the end, we'll have another open forum for some more questions. But if you got anything while we're going on, just go ahead and ask them while we're put them over in the chat bar while we're talking. So let's just first briefly touch on crappie as a species, kind of their habitat, what you're looking for when you go to a body of water, depending on what type of body of water you're in. So we have two different species of crappie. There's black crappie and white crappie. White crappie are distinguishable. You can scientifically judge them by their spines, but most white crappie are going to have pretty distinctive vertical banding, especially if the water is fairly clear. In really turbid water, some of those vertical bands might go away, so you might end up seeing a crappie that looks pretty white all the way through. Whereas black crappie, they have black spots all over them in no distinctive pattern. And even in really turbid water, because they are so speckled, you're going to still be able to see kind of that faint spotting that's on them. So crappie at this time of year, so we're just coming up on the spawn, pre-spawn in most parts of the state. Like all of our species, the way we're situated geographically, typically our southeastern bodies of water are always going to be 1 to maybe 3 weeks ahead in all spring spawning species. When the bite's picking up, they just hold on to warmer water temperatures throughout the course of the year. When we get cold fronts that come down, they're usually the least affected for the least amount of time. So as far as fishing goes, when you really start to see the bite pick up across the state, it's going to start in the southeast and it's going to kind of sweep its way up and across towards the northwest. So typically the northeastern part of the state and the central part of the state are going around the same time. And you'll get the western, southwestern part. And then once you get up into kind of that I-35, I-40 quadrant up in the northwest, that's going to typically be where the water temperatures are going to stay the coolest for the longest amount of time. So typically we see spawning activity up in the northwest lagging several weeks behind what we see starting off in the southeast, and in some years even in the central and eastern part of the state. So as of right now, today, you're going to have most fish, especially in the southeastern part of the state, starting to push up a little bit, moving out of their wintering grounds into kind of those transition areas around, near their spawning areas. So if there's big laydowns, creek ledges, things that have lots of structure, easy access between shallow and deep water, especially when that shallow water is their spawning grounds, that's what you're looking for right now. Boat anglers are going to have easier access to fish at this time of year because they are typically in a little bit deeper water. But on some bodies of water where you have a dam with a lot of riprap and good public access, sometimes that quick transition out to deep water is not very far horizontally from you when you're casting. And that water's dropping straight off. So you can get to them with cast and retrieve and slip corking in some areas. But really, for most, especially bank anglers, we're still a couple weeks away for sure in most parts of the states. But really, we're looking with weather the way it is right now and water temps across the state, we're probably looking at that last week of March, really kind of being the prime time getting into it across the state for fish. They're looking to spawn in water anywhere between, the mid to high 50s into the low to mid 60s. Depends on the body of water and a lot of other factors like rising or falling water in a lake. How big is the lake? Lots of different variables that can really make a crappie spawn kind of eclectic, where you get fish will push up one day and they suck back out, push up one day, suck back out. It really takes all of the factors kind of coming together at once to really get that prolific 1 week stretch on a body of water where fishing is just lights out in the shallows. But the extended forecast for the state right now looks pretty good. So we're in for a pretty good spring for fishing for sure for all of our species. But with that, crappie, when they spawn, they are looking to spawn on hard bottom. So, that could be gravel, it could be rocky shoals, it could be hardwoods like logs that are laid down. Your spawning is going to be, different areas on a body of water. They like shallow sheltered water, just like bass and other sunfish species. So they're going to pick areas that, they can get nice, clean, keep their eggs aerated, and kind of stay away from, if there's like a sandy flat or something where their eggs might be subject to getting a lot of silting and things like that. So those are things to look for as a bank angler. If you show up to a public access area, especially a larger public access area like a state park, that might have a lot of different points and coves that come through it. The ones that are going to be more productive for crappie are going to be the ones that have that shallow access to deep water quickly. And then that shoreline is going to be mixed with lots and different types of hard bottom is going to be what you're looking for. So if you have lots of rocky outcroppings that are kind of like shoals that go out into the water, that's a really good spot to look first. Lots of gravel, but they really prefer that hard bottom to spawn in. Some crappie will spawn right up on the bank. Others will spawn 10, 15, 20 feet off the bank in 8 feet of water. Others will spawn in 8 inches of water. So it really just a lot of variables that go into it. Can they sense the water's rising? Is it falling? Is it stable? Water temperatures, all that are going to play a factor when it goes into it. But once we get to that period, which from across the state, I haven't seen any reports that we're currently fishing as lights out anywhere for crappie, but definitely in the Southeast, we're going to be working into that in this next week. We have really good weather all this week. We're coming up on the first full moon of the spring in March. Walleye are going to be going crazy this week, and saugeye, and you're going to see a lot of white bass movement in the next week or so, 2 weeks. And then the crappie are typically lagging about a week behind those white bass on most bodies of water. So lots of those things to look for. So let's get into how fast do crappie grow a year. It depends on forage, competition, water body size. Growth rate on a crappie is going to be several inches a year for the most part until they start to get up to 8 inches. And then from there, it's kind of a gradual growth. But of that, as far as how fast do they grow, that's going to vary from body of water. And that's completely dependent on forage and competition. So if there's a lot of crappie in a body of water and they're all eating the same thing and there's not a lot of it, your growth rates are going to be much slower. So we're going to get into the baits here. This is going to take up the majority of the course of going through all the different types of lures, what is most effective, kind of what you're looking for. If you could only take 1 or 2 baits with you, what would you be looking to use? What's going to be effective just about everywhere you go? So we'll go through that. So I'm going to start off with hard baits. Those are baits that you're typically not going to be using at this time of year because fishing is just so fast and furious. Not a whole lot of reason to be running hard baits in that shallow water, especially if you're a bank angler. You're susceptible to getting hung up, losing, you can get you can get a deal of soft plastics and get 15 or 20 of them for a couple of bucks, and one little hard bait might cost you 4, 5, 6, $7. So not really fun to lose those, but they can be effective, especially in the post spawn for males in the shallow, and then in your post spawn summer months where those fish are warmer water, they're going to be active, but trolling over like grass flats. So we'll go through that. Really with crappie, we're looking for bait profiles. So here's just kind of a little crankbait box. Most of these are going to be, under 2 inches. So if you were to hold something up next to your index finger, barely comes up to the knuckle. So you're looking for bait profiles under 2 inches in almost all occasions if you're specifically targeting crappie. If you're throwing things that are 3, 4, 5 inches, you might catch a really big one, but you are going to eliminate the majority of the fish that you might catch. So when you're looking for a bait profile, no matter if it's a hard bait or a soft plastic or your jig head, you're wanting to keep that bait profile under 2 inches. And in a lot of cases, easing closer to an inch. But crankbaits like these, so if you were to look for one that comes in a box, lots of different brands, Strike King, generic brands like a Bass Pro or a Cabela's, a lot of times they're labeled as a panfish crankbait, or they'll have like pictures on it. So like cream lures, here's a cream lure package. It obviously has some bluegill on it, and they advertise it as such. And we're looking at a bait profile that's even smaller than this one. So we'll open this up. But if you were to go to a Walmart, if you don't have access to like a big outdoor retailer, these lures, these cream ones, you're going to see these in a lot of bait shops and Walmarts, academies, easy places that sell a lot. And then Johnson's another big brand. The original Beetle Spin. So if you're familiar with their packaging, the red and yellow, you're going to see Johnson's, cream lures. And now Walmart's really expanding a lot of their fishing. So you're seeing a lot more, mainstream, bigger brands that are also being sold. So lots of different options. But with hard baits like this, we're looking for colors, in the summertime, if you're running grass flats or some rocky outcroppings, you might go with something that's kind of a crawfish color. Shallow divers, 2 to 4 feet. But those crappie, after they spawn, especially in some smaller bodies of water, if you have nice big grass flats, those crappie like to sit in there. And so if you're fishing a smaller lake, you might be able to fish from the bank, or if you can get out in a kayak, or even if you can put a small boat on it, being able to troll using multiple rods, couple different colors, maybe a couple of different depths. But that's where your crankbaits really come in handy, is during that, after the post spawn is kind of finished out and we move into those warmer water temperatures and those fish suck back out into some deeper water. A lot of times you'll find them in great numbers spread out across expansive grass flats. They just sit down in those weeds looking up, and their eyes are right on the top of their head, and they're just waiting for schools of bait fish to come over or random bait fish to swim by. So that's when your crankbaits really come in handy. So little lipped ones like this, like I said, 2 to 4 feet. If you're fishing in 10 to 12 feet of water, there's some different options that you can do to get that small bait down. Might be as simple as just adding a couple pieces of split shot on. You could put on a swivel, give yourself like a 12-inch leader line, and then use a little egg weight, like a 1/4 ounce, 1/8 ounce egg weight, just something that's going to get it deep enough when you're trolling, because it'll stabilize. If you can keep going fast enough and keep your weight a few feet off the ground, then you know that you can troll right through without hitting the bottom. But that's kind of your option to get down into that deeper water, is using some type of swivel, an egg weight, or some split shot to get down. But little lipless baits, again, these are going to be another cream lure. So just like it's a rattle trap, a lipless crankbait, but shad color, blue back body. With crappie, colors, especially when they're looking for bait fish, and then in the summer, your pretty standard shad colors. So your blue backs, your black backs, your chartreuse backs, and then any type, if they're dual colored, tricolored, just those are your basic starters. black and silver, blue and silver, chartreuse, and something. If there was one color that you could pick to crappie fish for the rest of your life, and that was the only thing you could use, sticking to chartreuse. That's always going to have some type of activity on a bite. All the colors have their places and have their good days and bad days, but chartreuse for crappie is really just going to be standard anywhere you go fishing, even on the tough days. That's typically going to be the color that you get bit on. Here's another type of kind of a long, slender crankbait. Again, crankbaits are great. They got the rear facing treble. So when crappie are coming up to hit, your hook point is on the bottom. So that's what they're getting first. And it's on the back of the lure. So hard baits are great. Summertime trolling. They are also great during the post spawn. So female crappie, like many female species of fish, don't provide any parental care. So they come, they drop their eggs, the male fertilizes them, and then the male protects those fry for, a week or two. He'll protect the eggs, let them hatch, and then he'll protect the fry. And that on a body of water, if you have a big body of water, a lot of crappie that are going to come up and spawn over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, that bite could be good for a couple of weeks. The smaller the body of water is, the quicker that spawn is going to happen. But that week after those females have dropped their eggs and you're dealing with primarily male fish guarding, they are no longer focused on eating. They are strictly focused on protecting. So bright colored lures that have a rear hook, that's when your hard baits will come in really handy. So a little shallow diving crankbait, if you're in a couple feet of water, perfect. Just a real slow roll, keep it in the middle of the water column. Those male crappie will come up and hit it. And because you have that treble hook and some tension on the line, you're not really even setting the hook. They're setting it for you. But if you're using soft plastic bait, so if you're using like a baby shad or a little, paddle tail swim bait, when you see where the hook point's at, there's still about an inch back here. So what happens is that crappie comes up and you're getting bit all day long. You're just getting thump, 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 and just thinking to yourself, why is it that I can't set the hook? And you might be theorizing to yourself, it must be small fish. They can't, small crappie, they can't get it. It's not true. A lot of times it's a real big crappie, big males, but all they're looking to do is wound and warn that intruder. So when you have the hook point, the farther back on your bait, so if you're using soft plastics, you might, like on a baby shad or on something like this, it's a little bit more difficult to do with these kind of deep body baits that if you start cutting into them, it's going to kind of affect the way that it swims. But if you have something like a baby shad, something real small like this, that's kind of, you got about a half an inch to play with before you really kind of mess up the profile of the body. On something like this, you might snip off like a 1/4 inch at the front so that when that hook point comes out, it's coming out right at the base of the tail, giving you as much opportunity. But in those situations, it is more effective to use a hard bait, either rooster tails, brightly colored rooster tails, like an orange or a pink or some type of chartreuse neon, or your little small crankbaits. But anytime you can get that rear treble or the hook nearest to the rear of the bait in that post spawn period, especially when you're feeling all those bites and you're not hooking up, more than likely it is because that hook point is way too far up on the profile of the bait. Even on a small bait, even on a 2-inch bait, they're just whacking the back of this thing, just warning it, trying to wound it. They're not actually trying to eat it. So when you're going for those reactionary bites, sticking to your, crankbaits and little rooster tails. And then they make, inline spinners that have kind of the fish head on them. So these are good in kind of all situations as a hard bait that you're, just cranking in. But again, during that post spawn period, rear facing treble, you're going to get a lot of bites and a lot of hookups with that. But crappie, they like minnows, shad, little bluegill. They're going to primarily try to eat fish is what they're looking for. So little things like that. But again, that post spawn period, you might have something like that laying around, a big hot pink. And these, again, I say big, these are small. These are 16th ounce rooster tails. You don't need to go up to an 1/8 ounce. That's too much. When they're in that shallow water, you're going to be hitting the bottom. And you just take that on just a steady retrieve, cast it right out, snap your bail closed and start cranking. But just enough to get the blade spinning and to keep it off the bottom. And you're going to get a lot of bites after those fish have dropped their eggs. But it's a good time to use all of the ridiculous colors that are in your box, your oranges, your pinks, your purples. Because outside of that, when we're fishing for crappie, we're trying to keep it as natural as possible. So we're looking at baits that they really key in on, like a chartreuse, shad. If you put them under the microscope and you look, a lot of them, especially threadfin, bluegill, they're going to have a lot of that iridescent in them, flash. So chartreuses, whites, blues, greens, all of green pumpkin, those are going to be very typical natural colored baits that we're using 95% of the time. But that 5% of the time, that post spawn, that's where you're really looking to get after it with your harder baits. Now, if you happen to fish an area where crappie might not be, they're on the menu, but you're kind of like, I like catching a lot of different fish. Then if you're upsizing your crankbait, like let's say you're fishing a river system or you're targeting white bass, that's when something that's just a little bit bigger. So here's just like a Bomber Model A. This is a pretty standard bass size bait. We're looking at 2.5, 2.25 inches, just standard medium diver. You're going to use a lot of these to fish for white bass. So those crappie, a lot of times, especially if the white bass are a little late because the water wasn't right or they didn't have enough flow, you can catch some really nice crappie during the white bass run with a little bit bigger profile bait. But I would not target fish with a bigger bait unless you are just specifically targeting 2+ pound crappie, because you might get a couple of swipes from some little ones and they get hit on the rear hook, but these are not going to be as effective. So something that might be just maybe a little bit smaller, kind of that next size down, something like this. If you're a white bass fishing, this is plenty. So if you can get that good happy medium, same thing goes for like your paddle tail swim baits. So this is just going to be just a 2.5 inch, which when you're holding it, it doesn't look that big. But again, look where your hook points at. It's right in the middle of the bait with an 1/8 ounce jig head. And then if you take like one of the smaller models, like a 2 inch on an 1/8 ounce, and we see where that hook point is at, we're closer to the rear. Whereas this one on a 2.5 inch is pretty much dead center, if not a little bit forward. But these are also going to be things that you're using pretty consistently to white bass fish. So these are good options if you're trying to catch multiple species, because you're going to catch largemouth bass, you're going to catch white bass, you're going to catch crappie. And in a lot of cases with these 2.5 inchers, you're going to catch, a bigger crappie, over a pound. And maybe even some walleye and saugeye if they're in there as well, or smallmouth bass. Lots of bycatch with some of the bigger lures. But if you are just specifically targeting crappie, the smaller the bait you can go, the better. Because even those big fish, those 2-pound fish, 3-pound fish, they will still be looking to take a, inch and a quarter bait. So kind of our last hard baits that you have that you can use. Again, this is stuff that if you just have it in your box, it'll work, but it's not the most effective way to catch them. But super dupers, you'll get into them as well. So these silver ones, silver and golds with the prism through them. So when they sell the super dupers in their package, it's going to be called prism, and it's just kind of a piece of metallic tape that goes on and it gives it some reflection. You'll wear that down and off eventually from catching fish and from hitting rocks and logs. But we get that rear face and treble again. So these are awesome during the post spawn, but these really do a nice job of mimicking bait fish. So super dupers can be effective for crappie in all situations, but just another option that you have for a hard bait. And these super dupers are great because they're primarily used to catch trout in most places. So they're the right size for a fish. They're not too big. They give you that nice bait profile for them. And then here's just here's some brighter colored rooster tails. We've got our chartreuse and our oranges. some kind of mixture of silver and chartreuse. Great baits. You're going to catch fish pre-spawn up into the spawn and then post-spawn. But again, if you take away anything, when you get to that post-spawn period, fishing's been good, but then there seems like there's a lull, but you might be picking up bites, but you're not actually getting the take. More often than not, it's because you're using a bait where you don't have a rear hook. So you're just getting bit on the back. So as of where we're at right now, we're in that pre-spawn period. We're very early into the pre-spawn period. Fish are looking for those water temperatures to come up. They're positioning themselves in areas that are going to be very near their spawning grounds, but they're going to be out in that deeper water. So that's why it's always great to find areas that have rapid depth change that go up into shallow, sheltered, protected water. The quicker they can get to and from, deep water to shallow water, that's much more enticing for them. So docks, a lot of reason why people catch docks or crappie on docks year round is if you have a dock that comes out and you have great habitat that's underneath it, boulders, rocks, logs, laydowns, not to mention you're providing them above cover. With rapid depth change, if you're going from 3 feet of water consistently for a few feet down the bank, and then it falls off and goes out into 15 feet of water, well, those fish never have any reason to go farther than your boat dock. They have everything they need for most of the year. And that, under docks, you usually hold bait fish year round as well. So that's why docks are pretty synonymous around the state for people when they're out on them. They're usually fishing for crappie no matter the time of year. But that's why, because they got that rapid depth change and everything that they need pre, post, during the spawn, and then all of their summer and fall and winter patterns. They got food and they got cover and they got structure and they got depth change. So that's everything a crappie is looking for. So we'll kind of move. Here's Uzuri. These are going to be a little bit higher end, a little more expensive. These are going to run you anywhere between $4 and $7, depending on what bait and tackle shop you go into. But again, you're just looking for pretty natural colors, little crawfish color, something with a red, and then obviously lots and lots of silvers, chartreuses, greens, kind of a bluegill type color is what you're looking for with your hard baits. All right, we got any more questions over here? Live scope is going to cause a creel limit change, as I said, creek. Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, every state is going to have to manage technology as it changes, both for hunting and fishing. It's a fine dynamic to play, because as an agency that's tasked with protecting and enhancing the resource for not only today, but for future generations, part of the future generation of hunting and angling is centered around these technologies. So it can be a sensitive subject matter depending on what state you're in, how much water you have, how much public hunting land you have. So it'll be a debate that'll rage. Now, as far as imposing a stricter creel, that's just hard to say. There's a lot of people in play that would make a decision like that. But as far as, are we seeing more crappie getting ripped out of bodies of water? Like anything, you might be able to see them on your scope, but you can't make them bite. So unless you are just a avid, active, seasoned pro at fishing, for a particular species, then yeah, having live scope is going to greatly enhance your catch rate, because the factors to look for before you have that live image in front of you. Novice anglers who are going out and putting all of these electronics on their boat thinking it's going to make a huge difference, what these fish are learning to do is you put a shadow over them, with live scope. If you're right over the top of them, they just see that as a big avian predator. They'll shut down. They might be right below you. They see the shadow of that boat and they're like, nope. So what's really going to affect it is the new forward facing sonar, where you can run over fish, mark them, and then circle back and still have a forward facing sonar to be able to cast to them. But you're not on top of them. They can't see that shadow anymore. But it still comes down to, you have to be able to catch them. It's one of those deals. Will it happen? Yeah, we'll probably see it happen for creel changes. Might not be in Oklahoma, but it'll be somewhere. We're already seeing it with live game cameras out west. Utah's banned them. New Mexico or Colorado was right there with them. So you're going to see some fighting going on between state agencies, industry producers, and then the hunting and fishing public. So we'll see where it goes. But for the time being, don't worry about creel limits getting changed anytime soon for technological upgrades. That stuff is still expensive. So not every angler is running those on their boats. Most weekend warriors don't have $7,500 of equipment on their boat. Okay, no more questions. All right, so let's get into our soft baits. So this is going to be a whole gambit of things that you can use, but really what you're looking for, again, crappie, primary food source is going to be bait fish, whether that be shad, minnows, bluegill, bass fry, crappie fry. It's really anything that they can inhale that's a fish. They'll eat crustaceans, they'll eat insects. They might even come up to eat some type of terrestrial like a frog if it'll fit in their mouth. But they have eyes on the top. So the most important thing when you're fishing with crappie is keeping it eye level and above. If you're pulling baits up through crappie, they're a finicky fish. You're going to spook them. And just, a lot of times they're really slow biters, even when the fishing's good. So really probably the hardest thing for newer crappie anglers who have not experienced those types of bites is they're up biters. So they're coming in, and unless you're keeping constant contact with the bait, which is when we get it here in a couple of weeks, as we get into the pre-spawn and they're eating anything and everything, you don't have to worry about finessing them. You can just straight retrieve in, and then it's pretty easy. Your hookup success is going to be, well over 50%. But when you're in kind of the colder pre-spawn and then again in the post-spawn, immediate post-spawn, and they get more lethargic, they're not going to go hard chasing after something. That's when your hookup for getting bites becomes much more difficult, because a lot of it is finesse fishing, either underneath a bobber or just kind of, you might be dead sticking below a boat or a dock. So you're just vertically jigging, or you're dead sticking, or you're maybe slowly retrieving in and kind of popping the rod tip and just having that bait go. A lot of times they grab that, and if it's windy, we're using really light baits, it's hard to feel that. It just comes with practice. There's no good online tip that you can get for setting the hook on up biting crappie, slow biting crappie. There's certain things you learn to look for. Did your line go slack all of a sudden? Did you start to see just kind of it stretches a little bit, but maybe you're not feeling it on your rod tip? Every situation like that, reel up that slack and hammer the hook home. It's just, crappie are a finicky biter. So that's why we try to get people out and fishing when the getting's good, for that kind of month window between mid-March to mid-April, where those fish just get super aggressive, and anybody can kind of throw any of these baits out there and they're going to find, pretty good success. And the more skill level you have, the more confidence that you have in these baits, you're going to start to really stack up fish pretty good. So what we're looking for, again, chartreuse is kind of the go-to start off color. So if you're going to a new body of water, you're unfamiliar with it, start off with something that is either primarily chartreuse, like exclusively, something that is like this, where that there's nothing in this. There's just a pearl chartreuse. Some of them, they make glow baits. So these ones, you can just leave them out in the sunlight a little bit, or if you have a little flashlight, you can shine them real quick with the flashlight. And then when you put them in your hand, it's probably too light in here where you can't really see the glow, but these will glow underwater. So chartreuse, great color to start with. These are what are called a baby shad. So if you notice the back of the tail, I'm holding it, I'm not moving it at all. And you can see that tail just pulsates, just moves. Well, when this thing is underwater, it's pulsating even more. It's getting wind, current, water. So you can dead stick these. You can fish them right below a float, to a fixed depth, which is pretty, I like to straight cast and retrieve and pop the rod tip, but it is really effective when you're learning to crappie fish to use some type of bobber. So if you were fishing in maybe less than 10 feet of water, you would put, just a fixed bobber at like 2 feet above and just kind of work that bait in. If you needed to get down to deeper depths, if you're fishing somewhere where it's just the drop off to come up into that shallows is pretty dramatic, then you might elect for using something like a slip float where the line goes directly through and you have a stopper on your line, and then you have beads to protect it from going over the stopper and going over whatever hook head eyelid that you have on there. And all that is you're casting a bobber straight out. This bait sinks down, it's tight with the bobber, and all you're doing is just quick reel, let the bobber move. Now, if you're using like an open face spinning reel, definitely you want to crank it. Don't pop it, like don't jig it with your rod, because what will happen is you'll get slack. So when you're picking up that slack, that's when you get those big bird's nests and twists that go into your spool because you're reeling up slack. So if you're using a spinning reel and you're throwing a bobber and you want to bobber jig it, you just crank the reel handle and it'll move it. And this is what it'll look like underwater. This thing is going to jump and settle. And so those fish will come up. And what you're looking for, again, with the up biting, it's not very often that when you get bit, especially when you're using artificial bait, you're not going to see your bobber do this on the water surface. Very rarely does that happen. It's great when it does because you get it hooked. But what you're looking for most of the time, and this is why I like stick bobbers as opposed to a little round bobber when you're fishing for crappie. Because they're up biters, what happens more often than not is that just does that. That means that fish has come up, it's taken the tension that was holding your bobber up, so your bobber falls because now it's on a slack line. In those cases, you just reel up a little bit and set the hook. But that's kind of how you can indicate those up bites. It's a lot more difficult when you're throwing this and you're straight retrieving it and popping it because there's a lot more factors that you have to look for. So if you're just getting into crappie fishing, bobber jigging is going to be the most effective way to learn how crappie bite, with an indicator up top letting you know that you've been bit, because your bobber's just doing something funky. It's, sometimes it's just even just a little bit, if there's no wind out, or if the wind's blowing the other direction and your bobber's starting to fall down, that's indicating that, that fish has come up, it's grabbed it, but it hasn't turned back down to go. It's just, crappie are kind of lazy biters. They don't grab and run like a bass or a bluegill does, trying to get back into whatever cover it came out of. So with these, your baby shad are all going to kind of be around the same size. Some packaging is going to list what it actually is. Other ones, it doesn't, but they're all going to be a 2-inch profile, maybe even a little bit smaller. With these, you don't really need to do anything fancy, just a straight jig head. And depending on what size bobber you're using, you want to have pretty good tension to your bobber. So if the wind was howling and you're using a 1/32 ounce jig head, your bobber is going to be doing a lot of things. So on days like that, you want to upgrade the size of your jig head. You want that bobber to be flush like this as your bait's underneath it. So on windy days, you might go up to an 1/8 ounce or maybe even a 1/4 ounce. But when you get into the 1/4 ounce range, sometimes the hook shanks start getting a little bit too long. So you need to look for like crappie specialty deals. But for all intents and purposes of this course and what you're looking to fish for and at what time of year, that's completely unnecessary. An 1/8 of an ounce is plenty. That's as heavy as you ever need to get it. But in most instances, you're going to be using like a 1/32 or a 1/16. A 1/16 is a really good happy medium. So here's just a basic round head 1/16 hook and a basic round head 1/32 jig. Hook shank's a little bit longer on the 16th ounce, but not by a lot. So I like, Bass Pro sells these. I like the ones that have a little bit of kind of the metallic-y head, maybe even a glow head. But you can get them in any brand. It doesn't matter. Just Bass Pro brand. You can buy them in bulk. You can get 50 jig heads for $5-6. So it's kind of the way to go. Now on baby shad, you don't have a paddle tail back here or a curly tail to kind of indicate which way the hook point should go. But if you hold it by its tail, you'll notice that the top side, that it's completely flat, and the bottom side has just a slight kind of bend in it. And the way that you can really tell is you're not gonna be able to see it on the screen. But when these things are molded, there's a seam that's maybe a eighth of an inch, 16th of an inch below the top, and you can see that seam. So when you go to put your jig head in on something like this, you're going straight through the nose, dead center in the nose, and then you're just going to work that bait onto the hook, and you come right out on the top side, and you just want it to be flush, just like that. If you put too much of the bait on, it's going to, like, if you come out farther down the tail, you're going to get bunched up. If you come out too early, it's going to be hanging funny and look, it's not going to fish as good. So you're really looking to get it nice and flush. A cheap way to do that before you've done it a million times and you don't even have to think about it, it goes on. Take your jig head, don't put it in, just pull the bait up to the head. And then you know that your hook point's coming through right there. So you can just pinch where it's at. So when you go to work it on, you know that you're not going past where your fingers are at. And that'll give you just a nice straight set. So that's how you're gonna rig all of your soft baits this way. So on a paddle tail, again, you got a nice little body and a flat. But if you need another indicator, that paddle tail should be facing downward. So when it catches the water swimming, that's how that tail moves. And then a curly tail grub, you can rig them both ways. I rig them tail side up. Most people, anything that I've ever seen, I grew up fishing them with curly tail up. Almost any type of instructional fishing I've ever watched throughout my life, tail hook point is looks just like your tail, going the same direction, both facing upward. But it's not as important as with the paddle tail that if your grub side, the tail was down, you're still going to get water movement going through it. And aside from just your basic ball head jig with nothing on it, nothing fancy, you might elect to go with the Roadrunner head. So the Roadrunner head's going to kind of have the cone head on it, and it's going to have a flasher. Different brands sell them, but you're just looking for just something like this again. 32nd ounce, but more than likely, if you're fishing, especially a reservoir or a lake, you're going to be fishing with the 16th ounce or an 18th ounce. But another option for soft plastics, pre-molded swim baits. So there are some generic brands. Storm kind of popularized these in masses through retail stores. I have found great success sometimes with just a bluegill. When you get post spawn, especially in smaller bodies of water, small lakes, ponds, something like this can be really effective. And the great bycatches is every now and then you tag a really nice bass. But these are another option. With these guys, you're just swimming these in. But keeping, with the shad, bluegill, baitfish, ghost minnow, baitfish, shiner, something like that. Gold, silver, bluegill. Those are the colors you're looking for. And again, size profile doesn't, goes up to my knuckle. So you're looking at that 2 inch and under. All right. Talk about what kind of movement you do with your rod and jigs for crappies. So it just depends on what technique you're employing. So if you're on a boat, odds are you're vertically jigging, trolling, or dead sticking. So in the case of jigging, if you're straight below your boat or straight below a dock, you're just, you don't need to do it. It's not like fishing spoons or slabs where you're getting a pretty big violent 9 or 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock pull and letting it flutter back down. It might just be as simple as, 10 to 11 o'clock, just a little bit, just to kind of bounce it occasionally. That's how I like to fish when I'm casting and retrieving. Really with any type of lure that's a swim bait that doesn't have a paddle tail on it. So if the bait, like paddle tails and curly tail grubs, most baits are designed to be straight retrieved. That's why they have the back of them in a way where the movement is causing the action of the bait. Whereas a baby shad, it's got action on its own, like we showed. That tail will just kind of pulsate with the water. So you don't need to do much in the form of jigging. Just maybe a little hop here and there. But if you're just straight casting and retrieving and you're reeling in, it's just a little rod pop. Just just enough. And what that does is you're not really jigging, it's not doing anything. But every now and then, the more that you just are kind of subtly popping, just keeping a steady vibration with your hand going, what it does is when you get in a good rhythm, it's catching the slack. So it just kind of moves the bait like this, just gives it a quick little darting action like a bait fish would do if it was being chased by a predator or if it was nervous. So it just gives it a little bit more of that lifelike action. But in the cases of like these baby shad and some of the other baits that we'll show, you can just dead stick this. So just like a live minnow, you would just drop this straight down below a float or straight down off a dock or a boat, and you would just hold your rod there. And that pulsing, eventually that fish comes up and grabs it. You feel the bite, you pull up. So you don't want to get too active and dramatic with rod pops and jigging when you're fishing for crappie. It's just not necessary, especially because you can use other devices than your rod to create that action, like a bobber, by just taking one reel. And as your bobber pops, it does kind of the jigging action for you, but it keeps it in a more subtle, lifelike approach. So that's what you're looking for with, your rod and jig movement. If you're not just straight dead sticking, then the jigging is very subtle. Just, a couple inches of the rod tip moving up and down, and not steadily. You're not jigging. It's, let it sit there for, a few 30 seconds, a minute, depending on water temperatures, how active the fish might be. And then just a quick hop, it might get a fish's attention. It's going to come over and check it out. So subtle presentations with crappie are always going to get you bit more often, and more effective. So if I'm fishing like a pond or a small lake where have high confidence in where the fish are, I can get to them. It's not going to be an issue. I'm not having to go through a lot of different trial and error, moving around a bank or taking a boat around and using electronics and making lots of casts. If I just know right where I'm going and I know that I'm going to catch fish, I keep it really simple. I'm going to have a box that fits in my pocket that's like this. Lots of different baby shad options: blue and chartreuse, pink and chartreuse, blue and whites, pearls, silvers, with a few different jig head sets. And I'll just straight retrieve with a little bit of pop, or I'll throw them underneath a float. Especially if I got my wife and kid, or if I got some friends. And I've taken lots of people crappie fishing in the spring who have never touched a fishing rod before, put a baby shad underneath the bobber, and they catch fish all day. So if you're looking for just the basic way to go and get out there, a baby shad underneath the bobber is usually a can't miss if you're on fish, especially when they start to get active here in the next couple of weeks. So some other soft plastic options. We have a ton of options here. So again, if you're white bass fishing and you had a box that had lots of paddle tail swim baits, sassy shad, as they're referred to most of the time. Sassy shad is a brand name from Mr. Twister. So, but if you read a fishing report, more often than not, it's not going to say small paddle tail swim bait. It's going to say sassy shad. Most of the time it's going to be Mr. Twister, but you will find other brands that sell a generic sassy shad. And all a sassy shad is a short profile bait that is kind of stubby. So as opposed to a paddle tail swim bait that looks something like this, got a little bit of a glare on there. I'll take these out. These are just Johnson swimming paddle tails. So it looks like that. This is going to be a little bit too big for my liking. Now, this is going to do very well with some bigger fish. If you're fishing in an area, let's say you're fishing at Canton. So Canton Dam here in the next few weeks is going to light up. I would expect there to be some pretty good walleye fishing this week, into next week. We got the full moon on Friday. Weather's pretty good for them. Water temps are right for walleye for spawning, 44 to 50 degrees in Oklahoma. We're right in that. So, but you're going to, just like all species, you're going to have walleye that cross with white bass, that cross with crappie in their spawn. Not genetically, but overlap in similar areas of spawning around the same times. So something like this, if you're trying to catch multiple species, a long, slender deal like this that's a little too big for your average size crappie, your 8 to 10 inch crappie. But once you start getting into the the bigger slabs, your 12 to 14 inchers or anything over that, then they can inhale that pretty easily. But this is going to get a lot of good bycatch. It's going to catch a lot of white bass. It's going to catch hybrid white or hybrid striped bass, and it's going to catch walleye and saugeye. So if you're looking for a very multi-purpose bait during a crappie spawn, especially if you're going to a big reservoir where you get a lot of crossover of spawning at kind of around the same time, a long, slender swim bait in a 1/8 ounce, maybe even a 1/4 ounce on that bigger water, especially if you really kind of want to pick up a walleye or a saugeye, keeping it lower in the water column. You'll find those walleye and saugeye at first. And as you get closer to the bank and this rises up in the water column as you're coming back, that's when you're looking at your crappie and your white bass and your hybrids closer to the bank coming up to get that. So things like this, again, chartreuse, great color to start with. Just kind of like a shad, a speckle, black flakes through a silver or white body. Just a pearl white, and again, 1/8 ounce, 16th ounce, maybe a 1/4 ounce if you're fishing water deeper than 12 feet. Anything inside of 12 feet, 1/8 ounce and under, which is going to be the majority of the fishing that you're going to be doing in the springtime for pre-spawn fish as they move into their spawn. And if you were looking to just do crappie with a nice slender swim bait that also can have some bycatch, a little bit smaller hook, a little bit smaller profile, VMC makes their boot tail jig. These are awesome. A lot smaller than our other ones. So again, we get some nasty glare in here. I got light right above me, but we'll take these out, see them a little bit better, and we'll hold it up next to the Johnson. So here's our Johnson swim bait, boot tail, paddle tail, and then here's our VMC. So size profile, we're about a 1/2 inch smaller, but we're definitely more slender in the body. Hook point's about right. Again, the farther up that hook point is, when you get into kind of the post spawn, these become less effective, not at getting bit, but at getting hooked up. But during pre-spawn into the spawn, these are going to be perfectly fine where the hook's set at. So the VMCs, again, Walmart's starting to sell a lot more stuff, and most towns around you, if you're looking for a bigger retailer, Walmart's going to be your place to go. If you can get to a Bass Pro or a Cabela's, even better. If you can get to an Academy, they typically have a little bit more outdoor selection. Dick's Sporting Goods, Atwood's, and then your local bait shops. Your local bait shops, more often than not, won't carry some of the higher end merchandise because they have to be able to move it. So their margins aren't as good as, say, their own made lures or locally made lures, or just more kind of mass produced brands like a Johnson. But if you can find these guys are great. These little VMC boot tails. They come in a lot of different colors, but again, sticking with chartreuse, we got a orange and chartreuse, black and chartreuse, pink and chartreuse. But this is the packaging that it's gonna come in. You can just get a dual. It's like they are expensive. I mean, all things considered, when you can buy a pack of these versus these, you get way more of these for the same price as this. So again, depending on where you're buying it at, it's going to be anywhere between $1.50 and $3.50, just depending on inflation and other factors. But great ones to have if you're looking for a paddle tail swim bait. These VMC ones really make just a great overall size profile for specifically crappie, but you are going to get a lot of bycatch with these as well. Other ones that we have. So these are called the Joker. These are Strike King Mr. Crappie, and they kind of we got lots of tentacles back here with a ribbed body. So again, just a little bit extra action in the water. These will pulsate. You could dead stick these as well. These do not have, they do right here. So it's harder to see on the white. But with these, you're not really looking for any particular way to come out with your hook like you would be with a paddle tail or with a curly tail grub or a baby shad, where you're looking for one area to go into. So with something like this, typically I'll come out on a seam though. you know, they're going to be molded, so you have a seam line to work with. You just come out the seam side. But with this, it's not really going to matter. So you could fish this on just a straight ball head jig, like we've shown with the other ones, or a Roadrunner. But when it comes to jig heads for crappie, when you're fishing soft plastics, you really don't need to get outside of just a basic Roadrunner head and just a basic ball head jig. Again, 16th ounce, 8th ounce are going to be your standards, with there being, you know, opportunities depending on if you're fishing a pond versus, you know, broken bow dam. Lots of differences. So in those scenarios, you might go up to a 1/4 ounce, or if you're on the pond, you might go down to a 1/32 ounce, just because you don't want to get down on the bottom. You want to be up middle of the water column, because again, even with the fish up above them, you start dragging stuff below them, they're not going down to chase more often than not. So these, again, you see our pretty, we got a pattern going: whites, chartreuses. These ones are kind of like a June bug, or these labeled as purple sage, kind of a June buggy color, always a good one for crappie. And then black with some red flake, and then chartreuse tails. So just a different type of soft plastic. The balls that come off of the little tentacles, again, that's just for pulsation. It just creates a little, you know, it stimulates the lateral line. It, you know, fish sense things differently than we do. So they're all obviously visual feeders. So you put bait right in front of them and they can see it, great. But a lot of times you're maybe fishing around cover or structure, you're near them, but they're not looking directly for that bait. That's where the ribs that are on, the little balls on the back, the paddle tails, the curly tail, all that's doing is creating sonic signature in the water that those fish feel. They sense it through their lateral line, and it directs them towards your bait. And then once they get in that position, if you are offering something that catches their eye, that they're looking for, a chartreuse, a shad color, a bait fish color, it ups your odds of getting them to commit to taking that artificial bait. Because we'll get into fishing with live bait here in a little while. And with live bait, it's, you know, you don't have to worry about anything. You just throw a minnow out there and let it do its thing, and it gets eaten. Where can I find lake water temperatures? Our fishing report. So you go to wildlifedepartment.com, click on the fishing tab, and then click fishing report. If you're not already on the email list for that, you can, on the fishing report, you can subscribe to have that weekly reports emailed to you. And in most cases, it's not always for every body of water, but in most cases, we list the water temperatures. Now, those water temperatures are probably more than likely coming from game wardens who are either have a little water thermometer and they're just checking surface temperature at a public access area like a boat ramp, or they're asking an angler who's coming off of the water what the temperature is. Some of our reports are submitted from like bait and tackle shops. So again, that's going to be coming from people who are out on the lake. But you're really, once we get to that 55-degree mark and you start having overnight lows, not as concerned about daytime highs for temperature. We're looking at our overnight lows. Are we falling into the 30s, into the 20s? Things that, even though that surface temperature is starting to warm the water up with sunshine, we went spring forward this weekend, longer period of time for the sun to be on the water. That's going to trigger the spawning activity. But can you hold that temperature overnight? So when you start seeing lows in your area lakes or wherever you're going, if those are closer to 50 degrees, or even closer to 60 degrees, that's really going to kick everything off. Just a few days of lows in the 50s, it doesn't really matter what the daytime high is. If you can keep the lows overnight in the low 50s, 49, 48, you're really going to see activity pick up on your body of water very quickly, because that's really kind of what dictates it. They'll push up during the daytime. All species right now are going to push up into shallow water, especially on the really hot days, south wind days, 75, 80 degrees. Those bait fish will move up to take advantage of that sunshine, and those predators will follow them in. But as far as consistently keeping them up there to do their whole spawning routine, that's when you start looking at those overnight lows. That's what's going to stabilize those water temperatures where they like them. So another option for your soft plastics that is kind of a hybrid of the joker that we just showed and a paddle tail swim bait and our baby shad are going to be what are called the shad poles. So kind of, you're kind of mimicking a tadpole and a shad. So we get a deep body bait, just like a tadpole or just like our sassy shad, or even to some extent your baby shad. It's a little bit deeper body. Tail with a little ball. Again, that's just for extra sonic signature when it's the water, gives it a little. So this, if you were dead sticking it and it was in the water, it's going to be more horizontal. It'll stay like that, but it's going to pulsate as the current and everything else in the water. So you're looking for baits like these. And again, chartreuses, whites, black and chartreuse, orange and chartreuse, orange and white. And then something like this is great because it's got a real stubby body on it in comparison to our baby shad. So where we go to the tail for this one, our shad pole versus the baby shad, we're a little bit closer up the body. So if you wanted to get a 16th ounce jig head or an 1/8 ounce jig head on something like this, especially during the post spawn, if you want to use a soft plastic, these little shad poles are pretty good in the post spawn because you can get that hook point way back there at the base of the tail. And because it's already kind of a short stubby bait, when it sits on, you don't really have to worry about bunching it up as much to make it swim. So that puts our hook point right at the back of the tail. That's as far back as you're going to be able to get a hook and still have that tail have some action. But real good soft plastic for the post spawn because you can get that hook point so far to the back. But good every time else, just rigged normally like that. Sticking with soft plastics. So here's kind of a box of different baby shad, and there's a couple of shad poles in there, but box that's got some jig heads and a whole bunch of different colored soft plastics. But again, you can see all kind of keeping a pretty standard color scheme. Got the hot pinks up in the corner for post spawn. With these baby shad, if you're buying like a Bobby Garland, they're going to be a little bit softer. They have a little bit more subtle action to them. They're pretty good baits. I like them. That's kind of the brand that I stick with if I'm using a baby shad as a Bobby Garland. They come in packaging that looks like this, that either say Mo Glow on them. These are the ones that glow in the dark. These are great in stained water, muddy water, especially paired with like a glow jig head. This is just going to give you a little something extra. But these ones, they are very soft. So you're lucky. Crappie don't destroy a bait quite like a bass or a bluegill does when they hit it. But you're lucky to get, maybe a dozen fish out of one of these. But one fish can rip it in half, on the first go around. So the generic models, like a Bass Pro brand, they're going to be a little bit harder plastic. They're not as soft, and the tail doesn't have quite as much action. Body is a little bit deeper, but this one right here is a Bass Pro brand, just generic. And then this is the Bobby Garland. So when fishing is really, really good and they don't seem to be discriminating too much on subtle differences to the sonic signature it's given off, the texture, I'll switch over to like a Bass Pro or a generic model. So that's what this entire box right here outside of these bluegrass Bobby Garlands. Other than this right here, everything else in here is Bass Pro brand swim baits or baby shad. I will, if the fishing's good, I'll switch to those because they're less expensive and I can, go through them and they're a little bit hardier plastic. They last a little bit longer. When fish are a little bit finickier, water's a little bit colder, I like the Bobby Garlands or something where I get a lot softer plastic on it. They just, when they get bit, they'll hold on to them just a little bit longer because it feels more like they're biting into, some type of bait fish as opposed to the harder ones. They bite that. It immediately feels like it's not natural. So that's really the only difference. But I will, especially when I'm fishing ponds and in a little pond, if you got a good population of crappie, you might be catching 100, 200 fish in a day, between you and your group of people fishing or just yourself. So in those instances, I will burn out all of my Bass Pro baits because they're $2, $3 cheaper and you get more of them per package. So if you're looking for a cost-effective route, that's the way to do it. When the bite's really good, switch over to generic models that are $2 cheaper that look identical to the bait that you were using that was working, save you a little bit of money. What else do we got for soft plastics? A lot of the same in there. So post spawn, especially, again, when those male fish are super active, your basic panfish starter kits, you're going to find those anywhere you go. You're going to find just kind of the box that has a bunch of different little grubs. That's going to look something like this. You're going to see a plastic deal that's just filled with all different types of little 1.5 inch curly tail grubs, or little like full body tubes, things like that. So this right here is a good looking post spawn with these little grubs, because you can run these right over beds, right through all the bedding area. And the great thing about these little guys is that you can get that hook point right where you want it. So when I put this through, it's coming out right on the bottom rib, right at the base of the tail. So that puts it real. I mean, that's as good as it gets with the soft plastic for a hook point. Getting back, there's only about a 1/2 inch in back. So when this thing's fluttering through the water, fish comes up to smack it to warn it, you get a lot of good hookups with these. And these are super cheap. I mean, you can get like 100 of these things for like $2 at a Walmart in just those basic panfish starter kits. But some of the other stuff, like these chartreuse ones, things like that, those are going to work year round. So you do get some value out of some of the baits that come in those cheaper starter kits. But some of the other stuff that you might turn your nose up and think, I'm never going to use that, these brightly colored ones during that post spawn period can be very effective. And then here's some other colors that they have. So here's kind of more of the pinks, and then black and blue. These ones are kind of a higher end. Those were out of a package. Those didn't come out of a starter kit, but you will find things that, have the ribbing and everything else. But never overlook those cheap little starter kits for panfish, especially when they're spawning and post spawn, because you can make use of that chartreuse out of them when fish are actively feeding. And then once they turn into more defense mode, especially those males in the shallow, you start burning through all of those purples, pinks, oranges, stuff that catches their attention, because again, they're not looking to eat it. So the brighter, the better. They're looking to come and defend. So they have no idea what it is. It could be natural. It could be unnatural. All they know is that they're programmed to go and take a swipe at it to get it away from their eggs or their fry. Let's see. Here's another kind of, this one actually was a starter kit. So this is the box that some of them come in. Really cheap boxes. They can fill up with water. So don't keep stuff like this, these starter kit ones, safely secured, because they'll get filled up with water. But this is what it looks like, and it'll be sold as is. This will be wrapped in packaging. But again, we got some good kind of chartreuse colors that are going to be good all of the time. And then we got all those bright colors to exhaust during that post spawn period. So that kind of takes us through most of our soft baits from like paddle tails. Again, pretty common themes here. We're trying to mimic bait fish. So curly tail grubs, baby shad, paddle tail swim baits, and then offshoots of those. So shad that have the little ball behind them, or the one that we showed that had the kind of the trifold, something like this, that's got the tentacles coming off of it. So kind of a hybrid in between, a paddle tail and a curly tail, and then like a tube that's going to have lots of appendages that come out. But so that moves us kind of into the tubes and kind of creature baits. So here's a box that's got kind of a mixture of some shad poles, some hollow body tubes, and then some like beetle spins. So again, Johnson brand, they sell just the original black beetle spin. And then they have the orange ones. You could fish it with the flasher that they come with, or you could just take the bodies and throw them on a regular jig head or onto a Roadrunner jig head. These, again, you know, if it's up to me and it's like, well, I can only use one artificial, well, I'm going to stick with the chartreuse colored, you know, shad of some kind, whether it be a baby shad, paddle tail shad, something like that. That's going to be what I'm going to use. But if you have tackle boxes lying around, if you have, you know, there's ponds that you fish, small city lakes that you get a lot of wear and tear on, you know, switching over to a beetle spin, just lots of different options that open up, and you'll still catch a lot of fish. And in some cases, because they haven't seen a lot of things like that, you know, not a lot of people are throwing beetle spins anymore. They can be surprisingly effective. But ribbed whole body baits. So this is just like the ones that we showed that have the little appendages, got the rib body. These are Strike King, but they have, you know, more of a tube-like base. So these ones you would put your jig head on. Doesn't matter where you're coming out of it. I like to go all the way through to the bottom and come out, so it's not hollow. So that's all solid plastic that you're going through. But instead of bringing it out the side, I will work it to where when the hook point comes out, it's coming out off of the bottom as opposed to coming out the actual body. So that just gives you more to work with. And again, we look at where our hook point is located, pretty near the back. So this is going to be a good, these are great throughout the spawn, pre-spawn, during the spawn, post-spawn, little rib tubes. If you're in smaller water where you can really concentrate fish and you know where they're at, then I like more of a natural colored bait as opposed to a brighter crappie bait. So something, this is kind of my go-to for pond fishing and creek fishing and small lake fishing, is just a little Bass Pro Crappie Max, green pumpkin, red and black flake. They're called Squirmin' Squirts. You'll find these on the crappie aisle at any sporting goods store, along with the Strike Kings, and some of the other models that they make. But this is a hollow body. So for these guys, it's nice if you can get to a Bass Pro or a Cabela's, because they actually sell a head that goes to these that they make. It's called the Squirt Head. So it goes with the Squirt body. Again, you're looking at sizes 8 or a 32nd ounce to a 16th ounce. If you're using these, you're probably fishing some smaller water. So here's a 16th ounce jig head that it comes with. And with these, so this is a hollow body. So anytime you're rigging a tube and you want to use internal rigging, which is great because it keeps them from tearing apart because it is hollow body. So if you were just to stick a normal ball head jig or a Ned head jig or something where it's being secured by a collar, it leaves the body open. So when those fish are hitting it, their little sandpaper teeth just really start to, you know, turn and burn these things. So the only downside to internally rigging is that, you know, once the fish has destroyed the bait, it's ripped off all the tentacles after several fish, or the body has ripped away from the head. The only downside is you have to cut off and retie because it's internally rigged. So you can't just pop another soft plastic on it. So Ned heads are kind of a good hybrid head to use with these little small. Here's a 1/15 ounce Ned head. And you can see that it's got, put that up against my skin. You can see the little collar right there, the little clip. So you would take maybe like a 2-inch model or a 2 1/4-inch model for something like this, and you would go through the head, run the hook point all the way through the hollow body until it comes out the bottom. And then when you put that bait up there on it like that, that little collar, all you have to do is just kind of press down on it and you'll feel kind of a little prick from hitting it. It's not sharp. It's just a dull piece of protruded metal. And then it sits on it like that. So if you were to fish it this way, which getting increasingly popular with Ned heads, lots of different brands are making this type of head now. So the difference with these is that unlike a ball head, these will actually stand up. Won't do it in my, need a level surface, but when these things are sitting on the bottom, they stand straight up. So if we had a one that doesn't already have bait on it. They stand up, as opposed to if I put a ball head on there, it's just going to fall right over. So they're cool to bounce along the bottom, especially in ponds and creeks. This is a great multi-purpose bait. You're going to catch tons of crappie in small water with something like this, but you're really going to be able to target panfish and bass with these. So this is really what I fill up all of my kind of pocket boxes with. Anytime I'm just going to a creek or going to a river, going to somebody's pond, going somewhere I've never been before, I'll have a package of these, and I've never struggled to catch a lot of fish with them. So, and people, there's no particular way to fish them. I like to, again, just slow retrieve, kind of rod pops, not very violent, just very subtle. As I'm reeling in, it just, that slap catches and it just kind of darts it through the water. But the most inexperienced anglers I've ever fished with, you throw these on and they cast them out and just straight retrieve them at many different speeds, catch tons of fish in small bodies of water. So just another option, but you typically don't see something like this in the crappie fishing world. If you're looking crappie fishing videos on YouTube, or you're watching a crappie fishing show on an outdoor channel or something like that, very rarely, if ever, do you ever see them fishing something that is so naturally colored that you would associate more with bass fishing, river bass fishing, something like that. But very effective. I caught my 2 personal best crappie on these, so very effective. Let's see what else. So we had the rib tubes. Then you're gonna have lots of the, again, in your starter kits. Your starter kits are going to have these hollow body tubes that are going to look like this. But again, you saw where we could get the hook point at. These are great cannon fodder during that post spawn when males are protecting. But for just kind of year round, June bug and chartreuse, whatever, what did they call these? Purple sage for Mr. Twister, or a white and chartreuse. And then maybe the pink chartreuse, but definitely during the post spawn. Those are all effective. And you can rig all those other hollow body tubes, the generic starter ones or the Crappie Max ones. You can either internally rig them with like a squirt head, or like I showed, you can run them up a collar. But if you run them up like a ball head collar, you run them up something like this, where you got kind of a prominent, pretty deep. I mean, this is a 32nd ounce jig head, and that collar is pretty significant. You start running a hollow body tube up over the top of it, and it gets bit a couple of times, you're no longer going to be able to hold it on that collar. It's just going to rip clean. And that happens to the baby shad and everything else. But I like to internally rig a tube, because if fishing's really good, I can get a lot of use out of one tube. I'll keep pulling tentacles off of them until I literally have none left. And you typically catch fish all the way until those tentacles are gone, or the body completely rips clear. So kind of the same question as before. Where is the best place to find water temperatures on various lakes? Our fishing report is going to be the quickest way to get one. But you can call a local game warden. You can call a local bait and tackle shop. They'll usually have that information. But our fishing report, for inclusive of all of the major water in the state, our biggest reservoirs where we actively manage fisheries, they're almost always going to have the water temperatures on them during the spring, and those are reported from our game wardens. So they're either physically taking the temperature, or they're talking to people that they trust, guides, avid anglers who go out every day, and they're asking them what the water temps are at. So another box that has a lot of the same things: hollow tubes, real small, kind of a sassy shad imitator. That's about as small as they're going to make one with a paddle tail on it. So this would be a good one for during that pre-spawn period. If they're pushing up shallow and you want to throw a real small bait, that guy, or a chartreuse version of it in a really small, and then like a bright chartreuse, almost more yellow, kind of a pearl chartreuse. Occasionally you can do really well with red, a little flasher on it, little kind of road runner head. But this is very basic stuff. The first stuff that we showed, the VMCs, the Strike Kings, the Bobby Garlands, those are all going to be the higher end price wise for buying soft plastics. But in most cases, a lot of the lesser known brands or the generic brands, you're buying essentially the same equipment for a better price. And in a lot of cases, that harder mold that they have, that harder plastic, it's going to get you can catch more fish without wearing that bait out as quickly. These softer ones are meant for a reason, catching finicky fish. When they bite it, it takes you a second to indicate that you get bit, but because it's so soft and lifelike, they hold on to it for just a little bit longer to help you get the hook set. Curly tail grubs, if you're looking to just straight cast and retrieve, if you're fishing with kids, if you're new to the sport, if curly tail grubs are great because it's just straight cast, straight retrieve, nothing fancy. Fishing style is the same all the way through. So here's kind of a hybrid crappie white bass box. Got our chartreuses, some whites, some natural colors up there in the corner. Couple of different styles of baits, different ribs that are on them. But again, we're looking for something bait profile well under your index finger. In most cases, you only want to go from your knuckle to the base. If that's the bait profile, you're in pretty good shape. Even if you have huge hands or little tiny hands, if you're sticking somewhere below the knuckle and the base, that's a good size profile to have. But I always keep, if you were to just make a crappie box, like you really don't need much more than one of these smaller boxes, something like this that fits in your back pocket, fits in a hoodie pouch, fits easily into a backpack, your back pocket, whatever. And with crappie, it's great. This is just a blank box, but this one would give me the option for, let's see, 6, 12. I can get 15 different compartments in here. Crappie baits are all small enough to fit in every single compartment. You don't need anything more than this to go crappie fishing. Filling it up with just a few different types of baits and a few different colors. You fill a box up like that and you're set to crappie fish year round. So we just have lots and lots of different boxes of stuff that has been accrued over a long time of fishing. So that takes us through all of the soft plastics. I mean, the major ones that you're going to look at using. We've showed all of them. Some, again, little offset, something like a beetle spin, so we have an orange and chartreuse, kind of a creature bait that's got a couple of appendages. But outside of that, that really covers your soft plastics, maybe a black and a pink, black, yellow, and pink. These can be effective certain times. So pretty much anything that you're seeing on a starter panfish kit, you could buy that, or you could just kind of match the color schemes for some of the baits you like and something like that, and then buy them, in a package and then throw them into a box with some jig heads. And that's all you need. Most fishing, bass fishing has made it to where it's like, we need to have a million baits for a million different things. But in reality, what you're really looking to do as an angler for any species or wherever you fish, find something that works for you, where you find success. Because the biggest thing with fishing is confidence. Knowing when and why you might not be getting bit. Lots of different weather factors, water factors, those things. So when you know those things, if you find a bait that just works everywhere you go, there's really no reason to switch it up or accrue other things or listen to the next best and greatest. Because once you have confidence with a baby shad, with a paddle tail swim bait, where you're like, I know what the bite's going to be like. I know how I'm going to throw it. I know how I'm going to fish it. With crappie fishing, and using these baits, you have a few different options between dead sticking, vertically jigging, bobber jigging, or cast and retrieve. You have 4 different options that you can employ just about anywhere you go. Whether you've been fishing there your whole life, it's your neighborhood pond, or you're showing up to a small city lake for the first time, or a smaller impoundment, or you're going to a big reservoir for the first time, staying at a state park. Getting confident with just one of these baits is going to be the difference of moving forward with having success anywhere you go. because you're always going to find fish once you've learned how to use those lures. Really, the thing that gets a lot of people is that when the fishing is so good during that pre-spawn, post-spawn, you're just getting bit. You're getting bit sometimes on stuff that is not going to work outside of that period. Those bright colors that, you're getting bite after bite after bite, where if you were to throw that in October or throw it in July, you might catch a fish. You might get a couple of bites, but it's not, you're going to lose confidence in it really quickly. So keeping something like this that's going to catch fish year round, once you learn how to fish it and know where to fish it, when you have those things, stick with it. Build little boxes with all your stuff, so you're not always transferring between boxes and trying to find stuff. And you can do the same thing with our hair jigs. So the next between our soft baits, like our baby shads, your marabou jigs, hair jigs, these are going to be the other kind of the balanced out of not a soft plastic and not a hard bait. Like these are your two go-tos during crappie fishing, when crappie fishing is really good. Is going to be, again, Johnson brand, beetle bows, whites, chartreuses. That is a really bad glare. There we go. You're going to see these everywhere. This brand is, you're going to find this at local bait shops. You're going to find this at every major retail. So if you're looking for just a hair jig, these are cheap, like $1.79 for a 10-pack. Unlike your other lures, you might not have to tie on more than just one of these a day, because you're not getting the soft plastic ripped up. The head is already on, it's already in place. So really the only way to lose one of these is on a big fish that snaps you off, or you get hung up on something. So if you're looking for something for value to get out of a lure, hair jigs are the way to go. And they are just as effective when fished correctly as our soft plastics are. So again, 16th, 1/8 ounce for big water. You really probably don't need a 1/4 ounce. If you're needing to use a 1/4 ounce jig head to get to where fish are, you're probably fishing from a boat. Because when you're fishing from the bank, crappie aren't sitting down on the bottom like a white bass or a hybrid striped bass would be. Even largemouth sometimes might sit lower in that water column. Crappie like to sit around either, open water because they're shad, or inside of cover and structure, whether that be creek ledges where they're just kind of hunkered into the creek ledge, sitting there right on the drop looking up. They're very rarely, just tied down on the bottom. They're up in the water column. So 1/8 ounce is plenty, especially even during the pre-spawn, slip corking, anything like that. So if you really need to get super deep, stick with an 1/8 ounce, but throw on a slip cork and just go down to whatever depth that is. So when you're looking to buy your hair jigs, sticking in that 16th to 18th ounce. And Johnson will even sells a 32nd ounce, real small head. These are great in ponds, or when they're really, really shallow on any type of body of water. But again, whites, chartreuses and whites. Man, that glare is really bad. I'll take some of these out. Chartreuse and white, chartreuse and green, or a yellow and green. Something like this. And you fish them the same exact way that you fish the soft plastics. So you can straight cast and retrieve them with just a little pop. What happens with these, so just like on our baby shad, where we're pulsating a little bit with doing nothing. So when it's in current, it's really pulsating. Same thing with the hair jig. This back end, as the water hits it, it pulses just like a bait fish, moving out its pectoral fins in motion. That's what your hair jig is doing. So when you're reeling it in, you can just straight retrieve it. Nope, not doing anything with the rod tip, just a nice steady retrieve in. Bobber corking it, you'd fish it just like you would your soft plastic. So no difference. You're going to get longer lifespan out of a hair jig. But it's really just kind of, again, what do you like fishing? What do you have access to? Where do you live? Where's your nearest bait shop? What do you the more you can buy, the better. The more avid you get and the more stuff you have. It's just, we become collectors of fishing equipment when you just get obsessed with fishing or it becomes your primary hobby. But if you're just a once a year camping trip, couple times a year, or I just like crappie fishing, or I'm just, I'm looking to get better at or learn where I'm going, what I'm doing. I mean, a chartreuse hair jig and a chartreuse, some type of soft plastic shad bait, baby shad, paddle tail. But the baby shad and this are great for the absolute out of the box beginner. Not to mention these are knockout baits for people who've been fishing forever. So you see an avid guy out there, odds are he's got something on like this anyways. But these require almost zero technique. Because they're doing everything that they're meant to do without you doing anything. So you can either straight retrieve them, you can pop them when they're coming in, or they can be underneath the float jigging, or you can dead stick them. So these really are this is what you're looking for. There's one thing to have in your box. It's these two right there in a chartreuse, and then in some type of white or a blue and green or a blue and white, white and green, but chartreuse for sure first. And then you get stuff like this where we got a white tail and a chartreuse body. Lots of different mixtures and matches of that. Now, these are things, again, that you are going to be able to find something like this just about anywhere you go to buy lures bait. Now, if you really start to get into crappie fishing, browsing through YouTube, typing in crappie fishing tips, there's lots of guys out there that are lifelong crappie fishermen. That's all they do. They tie their own jigs, so there's specialty equipment that you can buy online. Sometimes bait and tackle shops will sell locally tied jigs. But when you get into those situations, you're going to find things that have a little bit more pizzazz to them. So you'll start finding jigs that are tied that, have some ribbon flasher through them and lots of flash and lots of, it's tied on. These ones are really cool, real thin bodied, but you'll find specialty jigs that look like this. They still have kind of your basic ribbon flashers that Johnson makes, and then some other pretty big brands. You'll find those at big box stores, but something like that kind of olive green with gold flash through it, on pressured waters, hair jigs that are fancy in prevalent crappie fishing areas where the fish get wise to what's being thrown at them. That's when you're not changing a whole lot. You're not, that's not a whole lot different from the other stuff that we showed, but it's a little bit darker green and it's got gold flash through it. So the specialty hair jigs can really come into play in high pressured areas. And then when the fish are a little bit finicky, you might want to get some of that flash in with the pulsation. Most of the stuff that I've shown doesn't really have a lot of flash to it. There's no sparkles through them. There's no ribbon flashing, painted stripe, anything that's going to give it that extra flash, because you usually don't need it, especially when fishing's good. But when it's not, and you need to fish, these are, a black and chartreuse with the head. It's got some flashers through it, that ribbon flash. So if you really start to get into crappie fishing, you're going to see a lot of jigs that are tied like that in a million different ways by, hundreds, if not thousands of different people or small bait shop companies that tie their own jigs. But hair jigs and soft plastic shad, it's the way to go. So I think that brings us to live bait. Let's see. Got one. Are the crappie at Lake Arcadia in pre-spawn yet? Yeah, I mean, all fish in the state are in pre-spawn right now. They're just, how far along are they into that? Arcadia, it's a muddy lake for the most part. So it's pretty stained. So that water heats up a lot quicker. That stained water holds that temperature in the shallows. So you're going to see fish starting to push up to feed fairly shallow. From a fishing perspective on Lake Arcadia, the coves up on the north end of the lake, that the Central Street Park that is now there on the Arcadia Lookout, there's 3 coves that come in right there. And the one main cove that goes right off of the dam, there's a hole that's right there that goes out into the deepest part of the lake, about 45, 50 feet right there off of the dam tower. And it comes up real quick. There's a lot of brush row that run down the middle of that cove. And so as those fish are moving up to stage, they're going to go suck up on all that brush right out in the middle of that cove. And on those warm days, they're going to start hitting those banks on both sides because it is ample spawning. There's all of that is rocky shoals, hard bottom, tons of great spawning areas. Another good place on Lake Arcadia to check out is the Spring Creek boat ramp. Not in the actual house, the covered fishing pier, fishing right in between the twin boat ramps. There's gravel out there. So you won't catch very many fish on a given day, but you might catch 6 or 7 in a row that are all, pound to 2 pound fish. Really, you clean 7.5 pound crappie, it beats cleaning 37, 8 to 10 inch crappie. So those are the two places to look for on that. But Arcadia gets kind of an eclectic spawn, it seems. I live in Edmond. I fish Arcadia a bunch. It's just like some days you hit them really good, but for consistency's sake, Arcadia is not a lake with a high confidence of like, yeah, you need to go now. But definitely this week is great weather. So for the next 3 weeks to 6 weeks, if you get a day to go out, those are the two places that I go to, is that Spring Creek boat ramp and then those overlooked coves. You get a lot of white bass in there mixed in. There's some really nice largemouth that you will find. So if you're using some of the kind of more utility baits on Lake Arcadia, you're going to get a lot of good bycatch. We've been heavily stocking it with saweye. So we're going to start seeing some pretty decent sized saweye here in the next, now through the next few years as they really kind of start to grow into 20, 24 inches. So you're going to get that bycatch as well, especially these next couple of weeks as those saweye push up there to, attempt to spawn. They're, for the most part, sterile hybrids, so they can't actually spawn, but they still go through the whole routine just like a walleye would. So if you can get out there, that's where I'd go. Also, the department-owned property off of Memorial, you can put a kayak in underneath the Memorial Bridge and go up Deep Fork and go underneath I-44 on the turnpike right there. There's lots of good riprap in there. So there's lots of places to catch white bass and crappie in there. And then if you park in our parking area below our conservation center and walk down that trail, we have a boat ramp down there. And there's a little cove that comes in and it drops out into deep water that's got some brush off of it. And you can get some decent fish. But again, I've never been able to just whack crappie on Arcadia where I'm filling up a limit of fish. Usually what it is I'll catch 6 to 12 really nice fish it's worth it for cleaning purposes. But I've never really been able to get into just huge volume numbers of crappie out there. So they might go back into that flooded timber on the east side of the lake that I just usually don't go back to. But those would be my recommendations for Arcadia. Thunderbird, Hog Creek for sure. All that flooded timber. Looking for rocky outcroppings in the Hog Creek drainage. Calypso Cove. All those there's 5 coves on the south side of the dam at the state park there. Those are the most consistent year-round fishing for a multitude of species. So if I'm just looking for straight bank access, that's where I'm going. Is to Calypso Cove and fishing around that Discovery Point, everything through that. If you have a boat, I would go up into the Hog Creek drainage, Little River. Fish are going to push up with the white bass. So Rock Creek, which is about maybe a mile from the mouth of Little River, off of Alameda Bridge. I have netted when I've been getting shad out there. I have hit crappie underneath the Alameda Bridge that were in the 3 to 4 pound class to throw back. So there's some monster crappie that are in that lake that hang out around those bridge pylons. So that's a really good spot. There's a big flat. So if you go to Sentinel Park on either side, North Sentinel or East Sentinel, you can walk up onto the bridge and go down onto the riprap, or you can fish the riprap on the park sides. But there's flats on both sides of the river channels that cut through that goes from maybe 12 feet deep up into about 4 feet. It's pretty silted. Little River is just pumping in silt year round. but there is riprap along there. So, and lots of stumps, especially on the south side of Alameda Bridge. That's one big flat of just stumps that's through there. So that would be my recommendation as far as bank access goes, is the 2 Sentinel Parks and then the Calypso Cove area. If you don't have a boat, if you have a boat, I would go up Little River and into the Hog Creek drainage way in the back of it in that flooded timber. So we're just about through. We got about 20 minutes left. We've kind of paced our way through pretty well. So I'm going to kind of do the live bait stuff now. So keep asking questions as we go if you got anything on your mind. So from a live bait perspective of what you're looking for just a basic setup to fish, if you have the ability to get shad yourself with the cast net, either from the bank or from your boat, if it's legal to use a cast net to get bait, it's going to be your cheapest way to do it. Sometimes you get into a bunch of like ghost minnows and stuff like that. And that's great if you can get them. But most of the time you're looking for shad, real small shad, less than 4 inches for sure, but really in kind of that 2 to 3 inch shad, 1 to 3 inch shad. There's a few different options that you have. They're pretty much all the same thing. It's just what you might have in your tackle box or what you can find at your local bait and tackle shop, because sometimes you're limited if you can't get to a big box retailer or if you don't order your stuff online. So the basic way to bait fish, we'll do deep water first and then we'll do shallow water. So right now, pre-spawn, if you're fishing in a marina, you're fishing off a dock, you're fishing from your boat, or you're fishing with the slip cork, what you're going to need is an egg weight. So I've got a 1/2 ounce egg weight and I've got a 1/4 ounce egg weight. You might even go down to an 1/8 ounce egg weight, just depending on wind, current. I like to go as light as I can throw wherever I go. So anywhere I'm fishing for whatever species, I'm trying to throw as light as possible if it'll allow me. The factors that are going to have to make you size up are going to be wind and current. So the more wind and the more current, the heavier your weight needs to be to make sure that you're getting tight to your bobber or tight to your hand if you're just dead sticking over the side. So what you do, take your egg weight. So if this is the main line coming off of your fishing line, what you'd want to do is, if you don't have a spool, like I keep spools of line in my bag, so I'm never actually cutting line off of my rod and reel, but that's the way that I used to do it and growing up. And you already have line on your reel. So what you do is just cut yourself off 12 to 18 inches of line off of your main line. So with that, you got a few different hook options. So right here's just kind of like a normal bait holding hook. We got a long shank. It's a pretty big hook, but for live bait, it's going to be fine. You're going to get bycatch with live bait a lot of the time. You could use a very kind of small Aberdeen type hook, something you might use for panfish with a worm, and you can catch crappie on worms. Just dropping a straight worm down, you will catch crappie when they are in that pre-spawn gorge. If you go into the lake and you're fishing with night crawlers, like throw one off the bottom to fish for catfish and non-game species, walleye, saugeye, white bass, whatever going to, be more on the bottom of the water column to look for stuff at this time of year. And then you can also just throw your worms onto a very small hook and fish them below a bobber or fish them straight below the dock or your boat or whatever. But normal night crawlers and red worms will catch crappie when they're eating. It's not their preferred bait, but when they're in that mode, they don't really discriminate. So it's a great way to kind of cross catch at this time of year. My particular favorite type of hook, I really like more of like a open face, kind of like an octopus type hook. So this is it's an Owner hook. Owner's the brand. This is a size 1. It's called an SSW hook with a cutting point. These are my favorite bait hooks and drop shot fishing hooks. So if you can see, our eyelid is offset, so it turns the hook, so you're getting good, turns that as you're pulling up, so you get really good front facing hook sets, which is a great way if you're going to release fish. You're not hitting them in weird spots in the gills and stuff. So you get really good hook sets with these. It's a thick wire hook as well. So like an Aberdeen hook, this is a thick wire hook. I can bend it with my hand. Big fish and even medium-sized fish can bend these just when they get bit. So I like a thick wire hook just in case you get bycatch, just in case, a big bass comes by or a big catfish or a carp or a drum or, just something that could take it. I have a thick wire hook. It's not going to break. It's not going to bend. But these are great. Love these hooks. So I'm going to use this for my example, but any type of bait holding hook that's like a size 0 to a size 6 is going to be perfect for crappie and then for other panfish and then bycatch as well. So however you like to tie on a leader and your swivel and your weight, I could put the weight on first and then tie on the swivel and then tie the line to the swivel and then tie this on. A lot of times I tie my hook on first so that I don't lose my line. I can just tie my hook on, attach it to my hook or my hat or set it somewhere. But we'll just kind of do this like the start to finish way. So we got our main line that's coming off of our rod and reel. We're going to take our weight. So we're going to take our egg weight and we're going to thread it on the line. Let it sit there, and then we're going to tie on our barrel swivel. You could use a snap swivel. So if you wanted, another option is if snelled hooks where they come in the package with like an 8 to 12 inch leader line and a loop. If you wanted to use those, that's fine as well. Just use a snap swivel instead of a barrel because you can just open it up and attach that loop that's on the snelled leader for you. So whatever knot you like to tie, typically with barrel swivels or a big eyelid, I'm just going to double over the line and just do a Palomar knot. Super simple. You don't get the luxury of doing it on the other end though. So I typically will do it on the first side that's got the weight on it. So I'm not playing around with the weight. Cinch that up, cut your tag off. So cut our tag off. All right. So now on our main line, this is what it's going to look like at the end of your fishing rod. Here's your main line. You got your weight on there and you got your barrel swivel. So now we're going to take that leader line that I believe I've already lost. Nope, there it is. And then on this side, whatever knot you like to tie, you can get away with the Palomar knot. It's not a true Palomar knot because you're bending over and pulling the line back through. So it's actually missing one rotation or one piece of line for securing. So just a basic improved clinch knot or whatever knot you like, trilene knot. So an improved clinch is just twisting that line around. I have 6 pound test on here. So I usually do about 6 or 7 twists. If I'm using 8 plus, probably only 5 twists because it's hard to cinch it back in. But so we'll get this tied on here and cut off our tag, and then we'll tie our hook on. So with these, you have a couple different options how you can fish them. So you can either just dead stick this. Like I have a boat over that with a buddy at Hefner in the marina. So we just have rod holders on the boat in the marina, and you just drop minnows off of that below the boat and just leave them in the rod holder. Typically, the fish will stay on there, especially if you're using like one of these little kind of offset hooks that's smaller. You use one of the longer shank ones that's not quite as thick wire. The fish is setting the hook for you because you have tight line. It's biting it, swimming away with the minnow, and then that hook is then trying to turn and get out. Well, with something like this, you almost always guaranteed to get a pretty good hook set. So you're just looking at your rod doubled over. It's not like you got to sprint over to it because you're getting bit. You're going to lose the fish. But if you're using like an Aberdeen hook or a long shank hook, there is the chance that the fish could be on there, and by the time you get over there, it shook that hook loose. Or you can fish it in your hand, straight below your boat or straight off a dock. Or you can also do the same exact deal with a slip cork or just a regular fixed bobber, depending on how much water they're in. So it's going to be effective pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn. You're going to be able to fish like this in shallow water and deep water. The only difference is once we get into that shallow water, when they're in that pre-spawn into spawn, and you just have fish coming and going every day, then we're just going to fish with this hook like this on our main line. I wouldn't have a swivel and weight on it anymore. I might put a piece of split shot, like I'm fishing with a worm and a bobber, or I might just leave it as is and just attach. You put that minnow on and then take a fixed bobber of some kind, and put it anywhere from a foot to 2 feet above, depending on how deep the water is, and throw your live minnow out like that. But when they're out in that little bit deeper water, we need our weight to hold this down there. So this is what it's going to look like. So I got about 14-inch leader line on there. Anywhere from 12 to 18 inches is fine. You want it just far enough away where they're not really looking at that too hard in the water. It's just going to sit like this. And then your minnow is just going to kind of be swimming around, and then he's going to get eaten. So pretty basic. You'd do this if you're striper fishing, hybrid fishing, white bass fishing, any type of live bait fishing that requires fishing directly over your boat or straight down. This is how you're going to do it. But this will also work with a bigger fixed bobber or a bigger slip bobber, depending on how much weight you have on it. So if you had a, 1/4 ounce weight on it, and you're using a bobber that you only ever fish with 16th ounce jig heads on, well, what's going to happen? Your bobber is going to sink. So you want to make sure that if you're using either a slip float or a fixed bobber, that it's big enough to support whatever weight you have on when you cast out. But this is about as basic as it gets for fishing. A bucket of minnows from your bait shop, or taking a throw net out and getting a bucket of shad, and then just putting them on like that. And that's going to be effective all year round, because fish are always going to eat live bait. So that's the way to go. But if I was going to set up, this is what I'm using right here. So if I'm in deeper water and I really want to be tight with my rod, and I'm using 6-pound test, we really didn't talk about rod and reel setup. I like 6-pound fluorocarbon line for crappie, for white bass for the most part, and panfish. It's a great multi-purpose. You're fishing for fish higher up in the water column. Fluorocarbon is as good of a line as it gets these days, because you can cast it. The big knock on it forever was you couldn't cast it. It's nearly invisible. It's got the same kind of properties as water, so it refracts light in the same spectrum. So for all intents and purposes, high-end fluorocarbon is pretty much invisible underwater. So that lighter line, but we're fishing higher up in the water column, because the only knock really on fluorocarbon today is that it's susceptible to abrasion. So if you're hitting rocks, if you're hitting twigs, logs, really easy to fray that line and then snap it when you get a fish on. But with crappie fishing, we're not fishing on the bottom, so fluorocarbon all day, every day. And then you can, if you only have 1 or 2 fishing rods and you want to multi-purpose it, 6-pound fluorocarbon on a 6-foot to 7-foot medium light action rod, and whatever type of reel you like to use, you're going to get tons of value out of that, because it's going to be a great white bass and crappie rod. It's going to be a great trout rod, and it's going to be a great clear water stream bass fishing, Illinois River, Mountain Fork River, Barren Fork, anywhere where you might fish clear water in the summer times, or if you travel out of state. Great multi-purpose at 6 pounds. But you can use 10, 12-pound tests. You can use 4-pound tests. You can use braided line. You can use monofilament. It doesn't make a lot of difference for crappie. It's just, if I had a setup, that's what I'm going to use. I'm based out of central Oklahoma. Most of my water is stained clear at best, muddy, downright turbid brown at best or worst. So I'm not really worried about hiding my line. If you're fishing one of the clear southeastern lakes for crappie, you might consider using a fluorocarbon, or if you're not going to use fluorocarbon and you're going to use monofilament, using under 6 pounds, 6-pound, 4-pound test to really kind of conceal that line from the fish. And you should be able to hold on to 4-pound test you can land big fish on, especially if your drag's set pretty good. So that brings us to the end. Let's see if we got any more questions. Now's the time to ask. I don't really have much more to add. Sometimes people ask, here's a crappie and panfish scent. I don't use this, but I'm going to try it this spring. I have never really used sprays for stuff, but something like that. You're going to find this at every Walmart. So if you're looking for just something extra, it tells you on the back kind of what the purposes are. You can spray this on live bait. You can spray this on hard baits. You can spray it on soft plastics and hair jigs. And it tells you on the back kind of what the time frame of how long it lasts on it before you need to respray. But typically I don't like putting the less I can put in the water, line and chemicals and whatever this stuff is made out of. It says it's all natural, but that's just something else that you could use. So the person need to do if all they can do is find small crappie and fish Prague Lake, and it seems like all is in the lake. I mean, if you're catching fish enough, eventually you're going to hit big fish. Size, structure, especially in small bodies of water, like a Prague, where that's a small to medium sized impoundment. It's bigger than your city lake. It's bigger than your farm pond, but it's still fairly consolidated. Crappie nibbles. I forgot that. So another bait deal. I do use these occasionally. You're going to find them in a couple of different deals. Crappie bites, power bait. Power bait makes one that's called like a chrome glow. So just like with my glow heads and my glow soft plastics, adding just one crappie nibble to your hook point. So that's fine. Let's say you're using a hair jig. All you do is take that little crappie pellet and just kind of work it right beyond where the barb of the hook is at, just like that. That's going to glow. It gives off some scent. So I've actually used just a straight hook. Like that one was too big. But let's just say we're using an Aberdeen hook, just something like this, real small panfish hook. I've fished ponds and small bodies of water with a bobber and just that, and I catch fish all day just on that. So if you're using worms, but you want it cleaner, don't want to get it all over your hands and your pants, these are great because these store. You don't have to keep them in refrigeration. Just make sure the lid is completely on. Those will last for a couple of years open before they start to stale out. So good call. I completely forgot about the crappie nibbles I had in front of me. So back to the small crappie, it could just be that they're stunted. There's too many of them in there. Forage base has gone down, so they hit a size limit and there's just too much competition. I see that a lot in farm ponds that have crappie. Conservation agencies, pond management people will tell you that you should never put crappie in a pond. If you are going to put crappie in, I think the base level is like 5 acres at least to give the bass, catfish, bluegill enough of a chance to kind of eat through your crappie fry. If there's sawguy in Prague, they love crappie. So could be a lot of different factors, but if you're catching a ton of fish and they are all small, odds are it's just a size structure issue. But what I have found is when I fish bodies of water that every single fish you're catching is between 8 and 11 inches, like you're not ever hitting a 12, 13, 14-inch fish. There's always one big one. So in small bodies of water like a Prague, and all you're catching is little 6 to 9, 8 to 11-inch fish that are just almost seem like, it's worth cleaning 30, 10-inch fish, but they're not quite big enough where you're like, man, I wish I was catching some 12 to 14, or I think I should be because I'm catching so many fish. Those are the types of lakes where you plug a 4-pounder. That just seems to be the way it goes. Like I said, fishing out at Arcadia, I hit a lot of pound to 2-pound fish. Hit very few small fish, and I don't hit a lot of numbers. There's ponds that I fish religiously where I will catch 200 8-inch to 10-inch crappie. And in one season, in one spring, I typically will hit one fish that's between 14 and 18 inches. But I'll never catch any other. I don't catch like throughout the course of a year, I'll only catch one of them. I won't catch any other 12, 13, 14, 15-inch fish. So that's probably what it is. Now, if you're only catching small ones and you're not really catching a whole lot of them, change your location. I With that, it's always every body water is different. But if you're catching a ton of fish and they're all kind of that same size, odds are they're stunted. Or competition has made it to where they hit a certain size, there's just not enough forage to go around. That's typically what happens. So we're coming up on 3 o'clock right here. So if anybody's got any more questions, pop them in there quickly. Otherwise, hope you learned something today. If there's any, my 2 cent takeaway on crappie fishing, chartreuse, 16th ounce, and working areas that have lots of hard bottom, whether it be rocks, gravel, hardwood trees, lay down logs. That's where you're looking to fish right now, all the way through the spawn. People who fish for crappie year round, they're going to follow them all the way out into the main lake and find those schools and fish for them. But, for the everyday anglers, for the weekend warriors, for the hobbyists, the people, you're trying to get value out of your time on the water. Do you want to make it count? We're 2 weeks away from good crappie fishing, like lights out crappie fishing, probably in the southern part of the state. And we're still probably a good 3 to 4 weeks away, at least central northern Oklahoma, for really getting into that peak crappie. But don't overlook warm days. So this week's weather is great. I would not be shocked to see some photos from around the state of some really nice crappie being caught in really shallow water. They like to press up as they get to those transition areas. So if I can leave you with anything, it's look for areas like that have rapid depth change into quality spawning habitat, and quality spawning habitat is going to be hard bottom. So if it's a big sandy cove, don't even pay attention to it. You might have some fish that push in there if schools of shad get sucked in, but for the most part, these fish are looking for a comfortable piece of cover and structure where they can chill. And then when they're actively feeding, they're right next to their spawning grounds. They might even push into their spawning grounds to feed, but they're going to be in and around them throughout the day and on those warm days. So the evening bite, the mid-afternoon bite, 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, as that water is at its warmest for the day, sun's up high. Don't overlook those shallow spawning areas because it's eclectic. One day it could be the best fishing of your life. The next day you go back, you might catch 2 or 3 fish. That's just how it works during the pre-spawn. So I'd look for warm days here coming up because we're right there on the cusp. But don't expect to hear lights out reports. Don't expect for peak fishing activity to take place here. Southern Oklahoma the next couple of weeks, and then central into northern eastern Oklahoma. We're still probably 3 weeks away from seeing really good fishing start to pick up. So I don't see any more questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this. If you received the email, you have my information. If you didn't, if you just jumped on here because you saw we were running a live course, go to wildlifedepartment.com, click on the fishing tab, go to our fishing resources page. Got springtime fishing tips on there. And at the bottom has my contact information. It's my cell number. Call, text, email me. If you got fishing questions, that's what I'm here for. We want you to be successful. We want to, make the most out of your fishing experience because, we've all fished forever in a way that once we didn't need it for a true food source, we have grocery stores now. We fish for leisure. You find your happiness. You find that, the calming, the peace that you get from fishing. So adding a couple fish into that day makes it even better. And the more confident that you can have it to where you can pass it down to your family and friends, that next generation, it's so important because we ain't making any more land. We're not making any more water. So not in our lifetimes anyways. So it's very important in order for these sports, in order for my position to exist, to have good managed fisheries. Any chance you get to introduce a neighbor, take a family friend, somebody who's been begging you to take them fishing. Just, think about that. It's sometimes a pain with kids, you learn to be patient and things like that. But if you have an adult friend, somebody who, you can take out fishing, you never know where that can lead. But that's important for us to continue to have, the world's best hunting and fishing available in North America. So in order for that to happen, we got to keep having people hunting and fishing. So we appreciate you guys for being here. Anything I can do to help you on your fishing journey, please don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, tight lines, have a great week. And if you catch any nice fish, make sure to go to wildlifedepartment.com. Share them at the dock. We'll post them. We love seeing the fish you guys catch. So have a great day. Thanks for showing up.